In spite of the important role that it played during the colonial period and the early years of the American Republic, the Shawnee tribe of American Indians has been largely ignored by the scholarly world. Clearly, at present, the Shawnees are one of the least known groups of Native Americans. Several possible explanations for this neglect can be offered. Undoubtedly important was the transfer of interest from the Indian groups of the eastern seaboard to those of the high plains and the Southwest as the frontier advanced. By the time scientific interest in the American Indian was aroused, attention had already shifted to the more colorful and less acculturated Pueblo groups and the bison hunters of the plains.
When the Shawnees settled here in central Oklahoma, they felt that if they stayed ahead of the encroaching Europeans, that they could maintain their true Shawnee identity, beliefs, customs, without the interference of the Europeans. We've always been told, and it's always been stressed, that we don't record, we don't write about our cultural identity. When our grandparents were young and growing up, that's the only way of life they knew, the true Shawnee culture. The way that was passed to them was passed to us, and that's how they expect us to pass it on to the other generations, to maintain it in a living presence, more than one that you learn about in a book, on a video, on audio tape.
There are many different tribal regions throughout the United States. The Shawnees are among the Eastern Woodlands tribes. Geographically, this region covers areas from Arkansas and Missouri to the northern states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and North and South Dakota, as far east as Maine and Virginia, and south into parts of South Carolina. Within this region, the Shawnees inhabited areas throughout Ohio, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. There were many other tribes within this region with whom the Shawnees interacted, including Chippewas, Ottawas, Potawatomis, Illinois, Abenaki, Cherokee, Creek, and Chickasaw. The Shawnees were known as a migratory tribe, and small bands of them were constantly on the move.
As the European settlers came about and the colonization began, a large number of the Shawnees began to migrate to the west. Their mindset was to stay ahead of the colonization so they could maintain their cultural identity, their identity as an Indian people. For whatever reason, they decided to leave that reservation, those lands, and migrate even further west, where they landed in Johnson County, Kansas. There they were given about close what we learned was 1 million acres. Again, they thought that this was going to be a settlement that they were going to have for many years to come. But again, the colonization caught up with them. A treaty in 1854 basically ceded those 1 million acres back to the federal government in exchange for acreage here in Oklahoma, northeastern Oklahoma, and here in central Oklahoma.
There are 4 primary components of the cultural identity of the Shawnees, including language, clothing, agriculture, and religious ceremonies.
As mentioned before, there's very little documentation of Shawnee religious ceremonies. The documentation that does exist is written encounters written by early travelers, explorers, on the first encounters of Europeans with the Shawnees, dating early as the late 1500s. What was written and observed about in those early 1600s, 1700s, we can relate to today as AST Shawnees in our ceremonial way of life. What they observe, we still practice today. Our ceremonial cycle as absentee Shawnees begins in the early springtime. We call it a spring bread dance. The ceremonies we have in the fall time, fall bread dance. It's a practice of giving respect, signs of appreciation of what's provided to us, no matter how small or large, as in crops, game, even life. In the summertime, for the absentees, we have what we call a war dance that we consider the main ceremony of the year.
The main piece of agriculture or horticulture would be the Indian corn. It's the main thing that makes our dances go, our ceremonies go. Without it, it's difficult to have ceremonies. So our grandparents usually had some sort of a garden which they grew corn, beans, sometimes potatoes, sometimes squash, and then sometimes pumpkin. And the corn, the pumpkin, the beans and squash would be used in our ceremonies. AST Day was created to basically honor the war dance because prior to when the executive committee decided to create this day, there was nothing for our tribe. It was basically they let tribal employees off for Red Earth. Well, since Red Earth isn't an absentee Shawnee ceremony or doesn't involve absentee Shawnee life, the executive committee felt that absentee Shawnee Day would be a better time to let employees off to observe our tribe's tradition, culture, and custom.
The traditional Shawnee language belongs to the Algonquin linguistic stock and includes 3 dialects corresponding to the Eastern, Shawnee Nation, and absentee groups. The Kickapoo, Meskwaki, Sac and Fox, and Cree tribal languages are also within this stock.
A few of the common phrases in our language you might hear are Nikoti, Pialo, Balachi, Hawasla and Nyaweh. A few of the common words you might hear in absentee Shawnee language are Gakila, Dami, and Skota.
Along with hunting for buffalo, bear, deer, and other game, the Shawnees were very productive farmers. Each spring, fields were prepared and seeds planted for the upcoming year. Corn is one of the most important sources of food and is very important to tribal ceremonies. Pumpkins and beans were also planted each year and are still an important component in today's agriculture. Together, these 3 foods are the cornerstone of the traditional Shawnee diet. The clothing items traditionally worn every day by tribal members in the past are unique to the Shawnees and are still respectfully worn today during ceremonies. One of the questions we are frequently asked is how the name absentee Shawnee was derived.
Earlier we talked about Shawnees living in Johnson County, Kansas. At that time they lived on a reservation. They were saying it was close to 1 million acres. As the federal government presented this treaty to the tribe at the time there in Kansas, they were aware that not all the leaders who signed the treaty to get that reservation were there. So as the discussions went on, as the negotiations went on, and the Shawnees finally accepted to sign this treaty, our leader at the time, Big Jim, wasn't present on the reservation at the time. And as the treaty was being accepted by the leaders present, they would go and sign their name or make their mark. It was decided that those leaders who weren't present at the time, Big Jim being an example, his name would be signed on the treaty, and then to the side of his name, they would write absent. So basically, the federal government at the time deemed us that name, and then we began to be known as the absentee Shawnees, because our group of Shawnees were absent from that treaty signing in 1854.
The absentee Shawnee emblem was developed by Leroy White, who was an absentee Shawnee tribal member raised in Little Axe, Oklahoma. His design is still recognized today as the official emblem of the absentee Shawnee tribe. Each icon on the emblem represents an important part of tribal culture. The moon in the background represents one of God's many creations. The two feathers symbolize two significant leaders of the Shawnee people, Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, the prophet. The facial profile represents Tecumseh, a Shawnee leader who is revered for his strength of character and military accomplishments. The two stars represent Tecumseh's rank of Brigadier General in the British Army. The phrase La Sa Wenwa is translated in English to mean among the Shawnee. Originally, all Shawnees were recognized as one tribe, but today there are three groups that have federal recognition: Absentee Shawnee, the Shawnee Nation, and Eastern Shawnee. The Absentee Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma is governed by a constitution that was ratified on December 5, 1938, and last amended on November 19, 2010. We are a federally recognized independent Indian tribe, reorganized under the authority of the Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act of 1936. The tribal government is responsible for the general welfare of all tribal citizens who are enrolled as absentee Shawnees. All citizens over the age of 18 are eligible to vote and elect candidates to serve in one of 5 political positions. These positions make up the executive committee and consist of governor, lieutenant governor, secretary, treasurer, and representative. Tribal programs are created to assist or meet the needs of tribal citizens. They are funded through grants, federal monies, and tribal monies.
The tribe has several programs and services available to tribal members. However, some of those programs and services have a unique service area. To find out more information on each program, go to our Absentee Shawnee website.
From all of us at the Absentee Shawnee Tribal Health System, we welcome you and hope that you will enjoy your time with us. Our culture and history are very important to us, and we encourage you to take the time to learn and share it.